Hey Connor, how are you?
Hey, how are you? It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to meet you for the first time. My listeners know that this is my ideal way to do an interview because when I meet somebody for the first time on air, because I have all this kind of natural curiosity, and a lot of our listeners who don't know
Yes.
you, they're going to have their own curiosity. So I always like to have kind of that natural sort of discovery conversation. So you are in Amsterdam. So before we started recording, I kind of assumed that Connor was in Dublin, Ireland, and he corrected me. He said that he's in Amsterdam. So which makes it even more exotic.
Yeah. So European.
He's so European, and it makes it all the more exciting. So you are a hairdresser. You're, I guess, originally from Dublin, Ireland. We'll get into that. You're currently in Amsterdam. You focus on color, and you're an educator and a content creator. Is that the basics?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good, that sums it up pretty well.
You're also sponsored by, I believe, Redken, Olaplex, and 11 Australia. Is that it?
Yes. Yeah, good research.
Pretty awesome. Oh, yeah. It was very difficult to do that research. I went to your Instagram bio where it was not hidden. So you've got a lot going on. So let's get into it. Why don't we start with where you're from? We already talked about Dublin, Ireland, and how you got into this business.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from, Dublin, Ireland originally, and lived in Kildare for most of my life, which is just kind of outside of that. And hairdressing was always something that I wanted to get into, but we kind of grew up, I'm not sure if it was the same in the States. I know every country's a little bit different, but it was very much perceived as a sort of dropout option, when I was growing up. And to the point that it even influenced me. I was like, oh no, maybe I should just do this as a hobby. I should just go to college and then, do this as a little part-time experiment, because it was so our awareness and our education of, what hairdressing was, what it meant to be in the industry was so diluted by kind of social narrative around how important college was, yada, yada, yada. And I went to college. I did pretty well. And then I got very, very sick. And it was one of those pivotal life moments. I'm diabetic. And I was only diagnosed at that stage, and I'd gotten very, very ill because of it. And I remember I was fine. I knew I was going to be okay at this point. And I remember being in hospital, and my own mother actually came in to visit me, and she was like, do you think you're going to go back to college? And I was like, I guess, knowing I didn't really want to. And it was her who said, well, would you not do hairdressing? You've always talked about it. You've always been into it. Why do you feel like you have to wait till after college? And again, I was so brainwashed by the social norm that was there at the time that I was like, oh, I don't know, I'll see. And actually, then when I got into it, that's what kind of, for me, started, for one, motivating me to prove people wrong, including my own old beliefs. And it really highlighted how big of an issue that was, as in a social kind of narrative around our craft and what that does for people in terms of their self-worth and how we view the industry. And that became sort of the cornerstone then of almost my mission going forward, being I'm going to make this be respected. I'm going to show people that this is an incredible job. I'm going to show people, that when they're my age in school, that they can look at this and want to do this and want to be part of this and feel and demand respected as much as any other profession. So yeah, that was kind of how my journey began. And that was about, every time I say this, I add another year on, which makes me feel tumbling towards the grave. But so I'm doing it now. God, I'm 30, so 12, 13 years-ish now.
I love kind of maybe the countercultural nature that almost spurred you on into this business. And I kind of feel like my story has a little bit of that foundation as well, because I also went to college and I didn't become a hairdresser, but I decided to get into the salon industry because I felt like it was a bit counter to the culture. And you called it a narrative, same thing. And I felt like what that meant was it means an opportunity, really, right? It means an opportunity for somebody to get in and to prove them wrong, as you say. And I love when somebody's story begins with a little bit of a burr, a little bit of a burr in their saddle. I'm from Texas, so I'm going to use the phrase "burr in your saddle." You know what that means?
No, but I like it. I'm going to say, what is it? Kind of almost like sort of, what would you say, like a chip on your shoulder kind of vibe?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. A chip on the shoulder, I think, implies maybe something personal, like kind of a personal motivation, some sort of like maybe you were wronged in the past. I think burr in the saddle is a little bit more of, well, a burr is just like a dried seed or something that came off of like a plant.
And specific.
And it's on this little burr has little spikes, and it's on the saddle, and you sit in the saddle, and you're like, the burr's driving me nuts. It hurts, my tush, and
as
it's just like,
do.
yeah, and it just kind of is bothering you, and it motivates you towards something. So that's kind of what you're talking about. And I love that because this extra motivation, and not everybody has that.
Yeah. I like that phrase, burr in the saddle. I'm going to start using it like here, and people are just going to be like, what?
What is he talking about?
Yeah.
You know what? I told myself, please don't try to do an Irish accent during this interview, because I have a horrible one. I have a horrible English accent. I have a horrible Irish accent. My Scottish accent is a little bit better than both of those, but I'm going to resist.
I bet you it will just slip out halfway through. It always does. And it's so funny.
It might.
Because I work quite a bit with America and like the UK and stuff, this is a very neutral version of my accent. I've had to do a lot of work to make it a bit more transatlantic almost, so that like it lands and doesn't just turn into a load of words mashed together.
Yes, I recognized your Irish accent as being somewhat moderated because I've known Ryan Cullen for a number of years. It's been, he's been on the show. It's been probably 3 years since he's been on the show. He's been out to LA. He's participated in Lookbook, which is kind of a quasi hair show thing that we used to be part of in LA pre-COVID. And so Ryan, when he gets into it, is difficult to understand. You are not difficult to understand.
It's taken a lot of suppressing, because do you know what it was? I just started to realize how much time I could save by not explaining everything 5 times. So I slowly but surely started introducing THs and, slight pauses and things like that. But yeah, when I revert back into it, it's quite funny. It can be a little bit more mythical to understand.
I like that. I like mythical to understand. So just curious. So like an Englishman, if you got into it, let's say you had a couple pints or whatever, you get into your Irish accent, you're with your friends there. Can an Englishman understand you very well?
If I want him to.
But if you don't, you can stay within your it's a brogue, right? We call it a brogue, Irish brogue.
Yeah, brogue is like a brogue means shoe.
Oh, well then what is the accent called?
It could be right. We often would use words like that for the most random of things, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it was.
Yeah, or we just, in the US, we just have the wrong word.
Entirely possible. I also wouldn't be the best gatekeeper of the Irish language, to be honest.
Yeah,
but yeah,
sure.
It picks up, you drop a couple of words, you mash a couple of words together, and there's a lot of, because I've been to the States quite a few times, and even sometimes I feel like there can be a bit of a language barrier, because Irish people have a tendency to sort of drop the end of the sentences, or sort of, in a way complete each other's sentences, but it's sort of like there's a lot of kind of inferring what we mean, you know what I mean? And that I've been in restaurants and cafes and stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, and they're like, no sir, we don't. And I'm like, well, do you know what I mean? Like, whatever, like, I like, it almost feels like a language barrier. So yeah, when I've taught with US groups and stuff, I was like, okay, Conor, you actually can't just hope for the best and throw out 3 words and hope they can guess the rest of the paragraph. So yeah, for sure.
Hilarious. Because I definitely have recognized the thick Irish accent as being one that is very casual. And that's kind of what you're describing, is like that so casual. And yes, if there's any difficulty in actually understanding 1 or 2 words, with that kind of casual sentence, you could be missing each other. Okay, so when an American shows up and talks to you, do you have a hard time understanding him?
Nah, not really. No, I was recently last year I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a couple of people with quite like a strict kind of Georgia accent that I found really endearing. Actually, I thought it was quite nice. But no, I wouldn't really. I'd find it. I guess we grew up on American television, so I suppose that's where our introduction into the phrasing and stuff comes from.
That's
but yeah,
true.
The other way around, it definitely we can get lost a little bit because we have these sort of like generally understood phrases in Ireland that don't make any sense. Like we kind of say, "Oh, you know your man over there," like as in that guy over there. Do you know what I mean? But people are like, "What man? Like, what are you talking about?" Or like,
I don't have a man over there.
yeah, like whose man? Or like somebody starts panicking. They're like, "My man? What do you mean?"
What is my man doing over there?
Yeah, you know your man over there. And he's like, what's he been up to? He's meant to be at home.
Okay, so you decided to be a hairdresser. Tell us how it goes in Ireland. Is Ireland, is there a technical license that you must obtain before you start working? I know there are some differences.
Oh, it's lawless. They have brought in many different kind of attempts, and they actually are currently putting together what seems to be the most effective one only over the last few years. But technically, I only found out last year, technically I'm not even a hairdresser because the initial way that they qualified, it was this thing called a brown card, which is honestly the ugliest name you could have given anything. But it used to be this kind of formal certificate you got as a brown card. And that meant you were qualified. And you could get this through many different ways. You could go through the way I did. And I was very lucky with my training. I went to a really big, well-known chain back home. And they were collaborators with L'Oreal. So all of our training was like L'Oreal or Sassoon based. And you had exams, all very formal. And you could get it done a little bit quicker then because there was, you kind of had goalposts that you could kind of plow through if you were really ambitious. Or you could just do it for 4 years, work anywhere. And then at the end, they would just give it to you. But that has since kind of collapsed, the whole brown card thing. And the reason this became a bit of an issue was because last year when I was doing more traveling, to get insurance was a nightmare because we basically hit this wall where they're like, one of my managers called me and was like, "So I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't think you're a hairdresser." I was like, "What?" And like on paper, yeah. So it's pretty badly regulated. It's definitely getting better. They definitely have put a lot of money initiatives into a very clear-cut training system now. But yeah, it's for such a small country, they really struggle to get a handle on how to regulate it.
Okay, so the brown card.
Yes, hideous.
You could either accelerate through, which sounds like you did, through the formal training provided by a non-governmental sort of regulation. It was provided by L'Oreal.
Yeah.
Or you could simply work as a hairdresser for 4 years and then, or at least claim that you worked as a hairdresser for 4 years, and then you get this thing provided by the government called a brown card.
Yep.
Which is like your badge of legitimacy.
Pretty much, yeah.
And do consumers care whether their hairdresser has a brown card or not?
They wouldn't even really know that language. They kind of would just assume, and that's why so many people were kind of set up to fail because they could have gone to work for a salon that essentially had them just shampooing and sweeping for years. And
right, because it's not even like a formal apprenticeship program where you're supposed to have a certain number of hours doing certain things. Not even like that.
Yeah, I mean there was guidelines around that, but nobody was really, checking in on or anything. Your employer could just like take them off, and there was other government bodies that kind of semi-state or were funding where you could get through, but yeah, ultimately, like nobody was checking, so it was unfair for a lot of people because they would have been qualified. And then maybe they would have left that original place of work, gone somewhere else. And all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, I don't have like my most foundational skills here. None of this was ever checked, So that's why we had a bit of, there was disparity between the training and like, people's levels and everything. But it's tightening up now, which is good to see. But there's definitely a generation that have been impacted by that. And we kind of see that in the training and stuff. And it's I feel pretty bad mostly for the professionals because they've sort of been set up to fail a little bit,
Depending on which path they chose. Your
Exactly.
path sounds like was, and of course, kudos to you to choosing the path that had the most training. But not everybody has chosen that path. And like you said, they could end up shampooing hair for many, many years and not getting those fundamental skills. Well, what is the benefit to getting a brown card? You mentioned insurance. Is it one of those things where an insurance company doesn't give you professional liability insurance unless you have this qualification?
Well, I have run into that issue. Yeah, it really struggled because that whole concept of the brown card they did away with it. So even though I was qualified and I had it, you never actually get it. You never had access to this thing. And I just imagined it being this gross, smelly card. Of course. I was like, yeah.
Like all soggy.
Yeah.
It's
like flies around it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I never got it. And then they did away with it. So you can't even really, we tried last year. I was like, hey, how do I prove that I actually do this for a living? And yeah, I really, really struggled when it came to things like insurance. Back home, not so much, because you're sort of under the insurance of your employer, right? But a lot of people would struggle, let's say, if they wanted to emigrate, if they wanted to go to, the States, or if they wanted to go to Australia. All of a sudden, you're lacking this sort of core piece of paperwork that you need to say that you're qualified. So yeah, lots of issues there, because I know in the States it's quite tight, isn't it? There's a lot of hours, there's a lot of checking, there's a lot of moderating of it. Or is that kind of widespread or just in pockets?
Well, it's regulated on a state-by-state basis. So there's 50 states, and some states require 2,000 hours, let's say, of very formal, I say very formal, going to a licensed school.
Yes.
And then there's a test that you need to pass. And some states have a test that has a practical exam where you've got a doll head and you're doing your things on the doll head according to what the state has put out there as the benchmarks for what one needs to achieve. And then there's the theoretical part of the test where it's like safety and sanitation and all that. And then there's some states that have gotten away from the licensure entirely. But that is then the minority. However, and one reason I'm going into this a little bit here for a couple minutes is because some of our listeners might find it interesting, because it is something that's hard to keep track of. And a lot of people in our industry, especially if they stay in one state for most of their career, they're not actually aware of what's happening with licensing in other states. So now and then I kind of get into it. So generally, across the 50 states, there has been a trend towards lowering the number of hours to get a license, and then in some cases, actually getting rid of the license altogether. But that is the exception. Most states still have a license. It's just become easier to get because those hours required have been falling. So in the state of California, for example, which is the largest state and has the most beauty professionals in it, we went from 2,000 hours to, I think, 1,600 hours to now 1,000 hours required to get a cosmetology license. And the practical part of the exam has been eliminated. The state legislature actually tried to get the license completely thrown out, the need for the license completely thrown out. And then many people within the industry have lobbied pretty hard to keep it just at a reduced kind of qualification, which was a compromise. So that's where we are now in the state of California. It's 1,000 hours.
So if they got rid of the license completely, does that mean that anybody could just decide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open up a salon tomorrow and I'm going to start doing hair?
Yes.
That's
the short answer to that is yes. Now it's a very controversial topic, and controversial because because you have a lot of people on both sides, and because the answer isn't exactly clear which side is right. So, and of course, those are the ingredients for a controversy, right?
Yeah, polarization.
Yes. So you have those beauty professionals who have been licensed, especially for many, many years, And the thought of getting rid of a licensing requirement for new beauty professionals coming into the industry is anathema to them, because they've put in all this effort. Technically, they spent a lot of money going to beauty school. Beauty school is expensive. Many of them are very expensive. Vidal Sassoon, Paul Mitchell School, Tony and Guy School are that is a significant expense for somebody. Not just the dollars that you have to pay of, let's say, $25,000 a year, just to put a pin on an average of kind of a high-end school. But it's also the 2,000 hours. You spend 2,000 hours of your time, that's 1 to 2 years of time where you're not necessarily earning an income. Yeah. That's that's early in your career. That's a significant amount of income that you're not getting. So the idea that new beauty professionals are coming into the industry and, air quotes right now, competing with this very experienced hairstylist who has all the bona fides of a license is very painful for an experienced hairstylist. Now, a lot of younger hairstylists is like, so what? No big deal. Why can't, if I can prove that I'm doing it effectively, and that proof is really in just, are you able to attract clients to continue to come back to you? Isn't that good enough? I think where I tend to fall is on the former side. I tend to fall on the side of those who have been licensed a long time. I tend to fall on the side of those who are very much for licensure and regulation to a healthy degree, because I think it does promote the professionalism of the industry, and I think that's very, very important. And I'm the chair of the Professional Beauty Federation of California, and that's one of our goals, is to increase the professionalism of the industry at large. Especially in the eyes of the client and the consuming public. So that's where I stand on the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Because again, I can see things from both sides, right? Because I think you can't measure somebody's professionalism or skill necessarily by hours, because you can have people show up who are very good at just spending those times and not efficiently, right? So I totally agree with re-examining the way we benchmark those things in terms of like the hours. I think it should be more to do with like work produced personally, because also, time is not something that is accessible to everybody depending on their circumstances. And this is a little bit around the sort of the work that I do as well, around equal opportunities and learning and development within the industry. And it's, time is a privilege to some people that not everybody has. That being said, though, our industry, I always say about hairdressing, it's easy to be a hairdresser, it's hard to be a good one. So I think, the idea that there could be nothing to kind of, for somebody to, even again, from a self-sabotage point of view, I think could be really detrimental in what it could do to somebody if they had no idea how hard it could be. Because I remember, and again, this is coming back to me challenging my old perceptions before I got into the industry. I remember, because I used to do my friend's hair, right? Be like totally unqualified. I had like a fake little Sally's card. I'd go in, I'd just look at the shade chart. I'd be like, perfect. Everything was bleached and we just put a color over it, right? And I was like, I'm basically like Picasso. This is literally what I thought, because I can do these basic things. And obviously when I look back at old pictures of the work, it's absolutely horrifying. But I remember when you combined that with the fact that I grew up in a society that made us think that this was the easiest job ever, and that you could just, sit out the back smoking cigarettes and go in and then do a client for a couple of minutes and then whatever. I really thought this was going to be so easy. I thought this was going to be so easy when I went into the training, and almost to the point that I was like obnoxious. That's why I'm very patient with, up and coming talent. If they've got a bit of a kind of ego around them, because I'm like, you're young, you haven't realized yet, it's fine. And I remember the absolute harsh reality of when I basically almost failed the very first exam, which was essentially applying a tint. And again, I'm lucky that the place I went to, they hammered home everything, health and safety, basic assessment, even up to complex assessment, to home care, whatever. And I remember being like, that was hard. I was like, oh my God. And I got such a shock. And then obviously I qualified and I started to do well. And then you get your confidence, and then you're presented with a scenario that you haven't been presented with before. And then you either do great or you fail. And either way, you learn from it. But if I had no preparation of any of those scenarios, or no experience in terms of that type of clientele or that type of hair, that type of work or that type of scenario, I'd be traumatized. I don't know how I would get through like a lot of the work, or how I could possibly just like keep my head above water. So I think it's really important that there's some sort of formal structure and system in place. But I also think it's always healthy to revisit and re-examine things. I don't think we should ever, I'm very against the idea of, well, because I did it, that someone else has to do it this way too. Because I think what that is pointless. I think it's not like, because if it's like, well, did you complain about it at the time? And if people say yes, then I'm like, well, then it's an issue, right? So why are we not working to resolve that? I don't think we should all share frustrations and just pass them down generationally because we had to endure them. So yes, there's our two very diplomatic opinions on that.
That's right. That's right. Very much walking the middle, and I'll drop in an effort to kind of walk the middle, devil's advocate, just to make the conversation slightly more interesting. Is what I hear from oftentimes the other side when I argue and lobby for the professionalism of the industry, for licensing, et cetera, and kind of maybe having that bar higher is, well, there is a percentage of the consuming public, the client out there, who doesn't want to pay a higher price for a beauty service. They want to pay a lower price for a beauty service. And, they want to pay $20. A guy only wants to pay, or maybe is only able to pay $20 for a haircut. And so why should they be subject to an environment where the beauty professionals have to jump through these very high hoops, they jump over these very high bars, which is going to create a situation where $20 is not enough to compensate them for all the effort that they have had to put into getting a license. Okay, so this is and I'm on the other side, but this is the thing that I hear now and then, and I get that. I get that. It's kind of like the argument of, why can't somebody get their hair cut by their friend for free? That's like the extreme version of it. Yeah, right.
I mean, they can.
They can, and some do. And some
exactly.
Do. So anyway, and I'm not even looking for a response. I'm just throwing it out there as kind of like the extreme version. So very interesting. I didn't suspect that we were going to get into an in-depth conversation on licensure, but there we did. So hopefully the listeners have enjoyed that. I'm always interested, though, in knowing the difference within our industry broadly between geographic places, whether it's the U.S. or the U.K., places like where you are. You're now in Amsterdam. Can you first tell us why you went from Ireland to Amsterdam? You said you moved a lot before we started recording. You like to be peripatetic. You ever heard that word?
No, but I love it. Do tell me what it is.
I love this word. Zero do I use this word. So I like to have an opportunity to use this word just to flex my brain and dig down into the depths of my vocabulary database. You know how there's words that you hear now and then, they get kind of stuck into the depths of your brain, and sometimes you can't pull them out. Well, peripatetic is one of those words that keeps trying to get out, but I'm never able to use it. One, because it basically means something that you don't need to communicate very often, which is somebody who likes to move around a lot or travel a lot.
Right.
And two, nobody knows what it means. So to use it is basically pointless, because then you have to explain what it is, which is what I just spent the last 60 seconds doing.
Yeah, but you get that delightful feeling when you get to tell somebody what a word means. There's nothing better. It's like the cream of the crop. I love it. I'm going to bury that now in my archive, and I'm going to wait for the perfect opportunity to use it, and I'll let you know.
It's in your database, and it's in the vocabulary database of all the listeners. Peripatetic. Okay, so
peripatetic.
Why are you so peripatetic?
Do you know what? Because I travel a lot with work, and I think it can be, I don't know if you've traveled a huge amount at work yourself. It, it can be very like glamorized, and it can be very like, oh my God, you're living the life. It looks amazing. And yes, I am so grateful. I've had so many things, so many opportunities. But it can also be super exhausting. And you sort of, you kind of lose a bit of your basic life skills when you travel a lot with work, such as cooking, such as like, scheduled meal times, going to the gym, just basic daily routine kind of things. And I kind of just, the reason Amsterdam was because I very lucky have a brother who lives here who is gone to Australia for a month, and they were going to Airbnb the apartment out. So I was like, I'll take it. Like, I'll just cover your rent, happy days. And it was off the end of essentially what was like a tour that I did. I did something like 16 events, dates, education over the space of about 2.5 months, including, big things like Salon International to just maybe smaller salon groups all across kind of Ireland, UK. I was in Australia actually as well. And I just kind of beelined for this like perfect month in Amsterdam where I could actually just reset and have basic things like wake up in the same place every day for a while. And Ireland, I'm from there obviously, but where I live is very remote. By choice, I kind of really enjoy being a bit more with the trees and the woods and all that kind of stuff. But man, it is cold. It gets like super cold there around this time of year. It gets quite dark. And Amsterdam's not far off, but I kind of wanted to go back to a city and maybe explore. And also it made me realize like I travel, so little of my work is actually based in Ireland. Pretty much none of it is. And so I am kind of considering maybe relocating in Amsterdam. I don't know if you've been yourself, but it's a vibrant city, but also it is like the best connecting airport for like pretty much everywhere. It's amazing.
Yes, I'm somewhat familiar with Amsterdam. I've been there a couple times. I lived in Italy for about a year. That was a significant amount of time ago. That was probably 25 years ago now. Sounds crazy.
So
you
were 2.
Yeah. Well, I'm 47, but my blue hair it makes me look a little younger, maybe. But the time that I spent in Amsterdam, which is maybe a total of 10 days, was a lot of fun. And I maybe didn't indulge the way that many of the listeners are like, oh yeah, we hear that Amsterdam is like that. But I did kind of a nice blend of experiencing Amsterdam. And what's kind of funny is that my wife and I named our son Dutch. And it wasn't really because it wasn't really because we had any sort of direct connection to Amsterdam, but or the Netherlands more broadly. But we like the name, and it's kind of a family name. But yeah, Amsterdam is super cool. And so are you like experiencing the restaurants and the coffee shop and kind of the culture of everything?
Yeah, and it's, again, like there is, again, I'm sure a lot of your listeners would hear and think it's very much, as you said, like that. There is definitely the wild side to Amsterdam. I hate the wild side to Amsterdam. It is very debaucherous, but I'm West, so it's quite like Berlin, to be honest. Just a little bit more kind of international and stuff. It's really, really cool. It's really diverse. There's so many expats here. There's so many like different cultures and everything that kind of pass through here. And it's quite funny actually, because I had to do an Instagram live for Redken, and while I was here and realized that I couldn't bring a doll's head stand because they're so enormous. And straight away I just put it on Instagram, and there was somebody who had a salon down the road. I was able to get it, and I was kind of chatting to a couple of hairdressers here, and their hairdressing team actually seems quite vibrant. It's quite interesting. There's a lot of variety between these really like high-end kind of boutique luxury places, and they have a lot of really cool grungy kind of sort of alternative styles. It's pretty cool. Yeah, so I've been here 2 weeks, probably going to stick it out another 2 weeks. I'm actually in LA, funny enough, next week, and then I'm back here. Yeah.
Cool.
It never ends.
Yeah.
But Amsterdam kind of is a nice meeting point between all of that. So yeah, it's been cool.
No, that's really neat. And I can't travel a whole lot for my life because I have a young family. It's hard to leave because kids have very full schedules. And then for work, I haven't had to travel that much recently, although this week I am traveling. to Dallas, where we have a location. But that's really neat that you're able to do that. So give us some indication, as somebody who's had their feet on the ground in various countries for our industry. Tell us what the differences are between the U.S. and Europe in general. Like what is it? What is salon life? How is salon life different? Are the clients different? Is like the routine different within the salon? Like, give us any sort of differences.
There's definitely some pretty huge differences. So America, like, you guys are definitely ahead in terms of pricing. So the prices in America that people charge, and I know, again, it can vary wildly from one end of the scale to the other based on location, based on circumstance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, the prices in America that we see on like social media, and I know there's this big trend of like price transparency, or why I charge $5 million for this service or whatever. There's a lot of that kind of videos. That kind of is something that we associated initially with celebrity kind of stylists, and a lot of like sort of, you only really got to that level if you were doing J-Lo's hair or Kim Kardashian's hair or whatever. So it is quite nice to see that you're seeing people that are in typical spaces with, civilian clients that are kind of able to put themselves in these sort of positions that they can charge this kind of money and get themselves a better quality life and what they deserve and stuff. But the flip side of what we notice, I suppose, in Europe, and I can't speak for all of Europe, unfortunately, I am not an ambassador for the entire continent, though I will try. But there's almost a sort of counter effect in that we could, but it'd be very difficult to charge those prices there, because you would be the person that's trying to sort of break the market. And it's a risk, because if you take that risk and it doesn't work out right, then all your clients go somewhere else. Why it's different I can't again speak for all of Europe, but particularly in Ireland, is because you have a finite amount of potential clients depending on where you're based. If you're in Dublin, fine, you'll have nice footfall. But we have a lot of spread out locations. Our country's very poorly linked together in terms of like, we have Dublin and then there's outside of Dublin, right? And it's like, there's no kind of nationwide transport that's all kind of really connected. You have a lot of like rural towns, including the one that I live in, that has no public transport. That the population that are in it, or the population that are there, you don't really get much kind of crossover. So the competition's different. The way of which you have to pivot your business model is different. And because we kind of have this sort of globalization happening through online, where we see, in this place, this person's charging $2,000 for what maybe back home somebody would be nervous about charging €300 for. That's definitely one of the things that I noticed in terms of difference is definitely pricing. And again, to be very diplomatic, I believe you borrow from both sides, right? So there's sort of like, I always have this thing around price shaming. I think it can be really toxic when people are saying things like charge your worth, or, like you're not charging enough, basically making people, because what that says to people is charge your worth, or if you're not, you're worthless, right? So it's sort of like, it can be a really kind of harsh thing. But I think that's a kind of an industry issue overall. But I definitely think we could borrow a bit from kind of, let's say, the US's kind of drive and motivation and respect to be able to up our prices. But likewise, then from a European kind of point of view, I think it's good to be aware of certain areas, especially remote areas, where there is different. The models and the economies are different and wouldn't necessarily survive that kind of sort of, I don't really know how to explain it, explosive, rise in prices.
There's so much to, I don't want to use this cliche, there's so much to unpack. I just used it. I said I wasn't going to use it, but I just used it.
It begged to be used.
It did. It begged to be used as much as I didn't want to use it. I almost used it just to tell the listeners what I was trying to avoid. Which was easier than talking about me trying to avoid something. Okay, so there was so much that you just said right there, and we're not going to be able to get into all the different parts of it. But as I was trying to kind of synthesize everything you were saying together, I kept coming back to supply and demand, and the demand that the supply is obviously how many beauty professionals are out there to give a haircut, let's say, or a hair color, and the demand is coming from the clients, the people who live in a certain area who want these services. And I find that there are big differences geographically between demand. There's some areas where people don't care as much. There's certain areas of the United States where guys, and that's what I understand, I think probably best, is, guys who just don't care if they're balding, for example. They don't care if they're balding. I mean, I've had countless conversations with my high school friends, and I'm like, dude, Propecia and Rogaine. Like, it's not hard. It's not that expensive. And you can keep your hair. And I've been telling them this for decades. And it's like, I don't care. And so this is somebody who doesn't want, they literally do not care about the shape of their haircut on their head and whether it's complementary to their look, and they just don't care about their appearance. This is somebody this is a low demand person, right? And so if you get a bunch of people like that in a geographic area, if you're a hairstylist who's offering services for this kind of person, it's going to be hard for you to break the market, as you say. It's going to be hard for them to increase their prices because the population, the consumer, just doesn't give a shit about what the beauty professional is offering. And then, of course, all the way to the other side, you have people like my wife who care a great deal about the color of their hair and about the shape of their haircut and all of that. And they're willing to pay more money for it. And so the demand is very high. And so how one measures this from one geography to another geography, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's ever actually tried to do it. But in areas where you have a lot of demand for and beauty services, high-end, high-quality beauty services delivered by beauty professionals who put a lot of years into it and can do great color and can do a great haircut, they can raise their prices in areas where the demand is very high. That's just kind of how I see it. And as you indicated, there's places that are the former and there's places that are the latter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, there's so many parts to it because actually, funny, I love all this because I actually did study economics. That's what I did in college. And I did it in school and I did it through to like my second year of college. And I actually loved it because it does give you an understanding of sort of the kind of climate. But it's so cultural, it's so, socioeconomic, it's so like dependent on so many different factors. And that's why I think it can be such a delicate topic. So, for example, one thing that I noticed with kind of the US especially is people are very, very good at branding themselves. People are very good at selling what they do and making clients believe that only they can do it. And I'm sure that's very much the truth. Whereas that culturally in certain places, so I can say in Ireland, that is very hard to do because Irish people inherently we're very suspicious. It's something that we're quite proud of. We're very, there's kind of a no BS approach with Irish people. We see through it like X-ray vision. And when you combine that with a limited population, like I've worked with people that they have various skills in the craft way above my own that I'm like, how come you're not charging more for your haircuts or how come you're not charging more for your color or whatever? And it's because they're like, well, I know that I could, and I potentially could get some clients to pay that. But I also know that there's somebody down the road who's also very, very, very skilled, who will just watch me and they won't put their prices up, or they'll put them up, but not as much as mine, because the competition is a little bit stiffer because the population is less than pockets of, let's say, other countries.
So more supply than demand, slightly, right?
Slightly.
That's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, that scale will be tipped a little bit. And again, I know it's relevant because when I'm talking about the US, I'm talking about obviously, huge cosmopolitan areas. I'm talking New York, LA. Of course, there's places in the US that would mirror this type of environment where actually it'd be a smaller town. There's only a few salons. But I guess in Ireland, we don't have that sort of, like we have one particular street in Dublin called South William Street, which essentially is a hairdresser street. It's pretty much entirely salons, beauty salons. It's a very, very busy street. It's very central. It's like 5 minutes off Grafton Street. And even within that, there would be variation in prices, of course, but it would be very unusual to see somebody try go wildly outside of it. And it comes down to risk assessment. Yeah. It comes down to, do I have enough? And this is what I talk about when I do education with people, you know, around how dangerous that can be to just blindly give advice to people, to be like, you should be charging, you know, $700 an hour or euros or whatever it is. Because if somebody doesn't do correct risk assessment and perhaps does that, the short term, which everybody will experience, you'll initially get this short term sort of maybe loss of clients, which is loss of revenue. And the hope then is that short-term risk has a long-term reward, because you will be able to then, you maybe will find those rich clients, and then they'll tell their rich friends, and then suddenly you're rich, they're rich, everyone's rich, we're all happy. And it does, you've beat the demand and supply system, because you've put yourself out there as a luxury good that, you know, which is why some people spend $700 on a watch versus a $10 watch, the same thing. We know that as an economic principle. But the short-term risk of that, of those loss of clients, that loss of revenue, is something that a lot of people can't afford to take, because if it doesn't work out and suddenly they're like, oh, I've got bills, I've got kids, I've got whatever, and then they have to backtrack, you can't even guarantee necessarily. For one, it hurts your morale, right? Because you're suddenly like, I'm worth this, and then you're like, never mind, you know, and like that's challenging. And it's so unusual in the industry. We don't have many people that are doing that. Even my prices aren't anything like, and I do so little client work that I have to put it up, but they're not like what, you know, I've seen some people in the US charge, which again, I commend. I think it's great. If you can charge it, you can charge it. But yeah, it's a different climate. And I think it's very interesting.
And again, so much to unpack right there. There I am using the cliche I hate.
Yeah.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking modesty. There's because my mom comes from the sticks in Texas, and when you're in a very small town, and maybe it's a small town thing, because you're also out in kind of a rural sort of area. You've said about Ireland, where you live. There, and it's a small community, and everybody knows each other's stuff. There is an inherent humility and an inherent modesty to that sort of environment. And if one person breaks the market, again, air quotes, because I've never heard that in terms of our industry, but I think that does imply the sense that somebody is getting outside the norm. Like they think so highly of themselves, or going outside of this small, insulated community, and that is an uncomfortable thing to do in in an environment like that. And it's almost saying like, you know, my value is more than all the rest of you. You know, that's almost like what it's saying by raising your prices above everybody else. And in a small community like that, that's a negative thing. And,
yeah.
Right?
And that's, you're right in terms of that's how it can be perceived. For sure, it can definitely rock boats. It could definitely be very turbulent. It could definitely, and I actually don't see it as somebody saying, you know, my understanding when somebody does that is they're like, this is the life I want to live. This is what I think I should be getting paid. And I'm like, yeah, go get it. Go off. You try that. Whereas they're from the outside, they could feel under quite a lot of pressure, under a lot of scrutiny to do that, because it would be so it would just be like shockwaves. Do you know what I mean? People are like, oh my God, what? And it could pay off, you know what I mean? But again, it's that short-term risk that I think really does hold a lot of people back. And it's very real, because we do have, like most places, we've got really bad housing crisis, we've got really bad hyperinflation, we've got really bad cost of living. So it does sort of diminish your capacity to take these kind of chances. And
but it also increases the risk of not taking those chances. And this is where I'm going next, which is with the hyperinflation that we've had. I don't know if an economist would, that we had a bout of hyperinflation. You know, now it's come down, and now we're at like 4 or 5%, which is still uncomfortably high, but it's not the 9% that we had about a year ago. And you guys are experiencing the same things over there in Western Europe. You're also experiencing high inflation.
Massively.
That makes it riskier. to not raise your prices at least consistent with inflation, because all you're doing, this, let's call it the community of hairdressers in a small geography, in the small town in Ireland, they're experiencing the inflation too. The food prices are going up, their housing costs are going up. When they get a plumber to come out and fix something in their house, the plumber's charging more money. So the hairdresser community broadly, ideally together, recognizes their need to increase their prices at least to an inflationary level. And I wish that communities didn't feel like if one person raises their prices, that person is trying to, quote, break the market. That person is simply trying to keep up their income with their expenses, right?
Absolutely,
and I think that tendency comes back to kind of that maybe a culture of humility and modesty that some communities like that have. But we've been very philosophical about this, which is cool. And I am hoping the listeners, like the philosophical nature of this conversation. But we've talked about some super cool things here. I feel like I didn't even ask you a lot of the questions that I have for you. And here we are kind of bumping up against the hour. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and then hopefully you'll come back on and we'll do an episode 2.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. So to wrap up this episode, I want to ask you one of my favorite questions, which is a wave the wand question. If there's anything about the industry at all that you could change right now with the wave of a wand, what would it be?
With the wave of a wand. I definitely think it's relating to my field, which I know we'll get really into the beef of that on the next one. But it's around how we learn, how we teach, how we educate, and how we motivate and inspire our industry. Because I've done a lot of research over the last few years around neurodiversity and what that means, what it looks like, all the different kind of umbrella terms that falls under. And it's something that's really, really prevalent within our industry. And the way generally, and I always put a big fat generally over this because I have been lynched before because people would think, well, I don't do it that way, or, the way we teach is different. That's all fine. But as a generalization, there is a very linear approach to how we educate and how we move people through our kind of development processes, how we make, and this is why we kind of, circling back to earlier, we kind of, pun intended, split hairs on like the pros and cons of different ways of licensing and everything, because ultimately humans are not linear. The way we think is not linear. Our access, our situations are not linear. They're very, very. And I think just in a general, if I was to wave a wand and put it under a broad kind of statement, it would be to encourage open-mindedness with how we look at education within the industry, and begin to just start asking questions around that to facilitate better, learning and development and all that kind of stuff.
That's a biggie. You mentioned, of course, we're speaking about our industries specifically here, but I mean, this is what educators and just public servants and social scientists, and everybody wants to figure out worldwide within education, because that's such a big issue, with humans in generally. So super interesting. I love that. And so I'm going to write that down. And when we get together next time, maybe we'll get into that a little bit more, as well as, as well as what you specifically educate on, and what you're going to start doing more. You've got an educational platform coming out. So
yes, pending.
Yes, pending. All right, listeners. So come back, and we're going to do Conor at another time. We'll do another hour. Thank you so much, Conor. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our tangents.